All right, so I got some updates here for you guys on the ongoing resurgence of the American labor movement. This one is specifically centering around a couple of different strikes that we've had go on over the last couple of days at some pretty major stores. So we have one that's Starbucks workers that we're going to get into some of the details here, and then there's another one that is actually the largest academic strike in the history of the country. Okay, so let's just go ahead and start off here with the Starbucks locations. Obviously, we have been tracking this movement for months and months and months now. We have hundreds of stores that have either filed or successfully formed their unions, and now we're basically at a point where they are trying to negotiate with Starbucks for the conditions of their contracts. And Starbucks has been, first of all, engaging in just rampant illegal union busting practices, which the NLRB has accused them of, and filed complaints against them for literally, again, hundreds of violations on that front. But beyond just their union busting tactics and anti-union propaganda, once these unions have successfully won their elections, they have basically just been stalling, hoping to run out the clock, or sabotage these put off these elections or these finalizations of these contracts as long as physically possible. So let's go ahead and get into some of the details here. They say Starbucks workers strike on Red Cup Day over stalled labor talks. So let's get a little bit of details here. They say employees from more than 100 Starbucks stores walked off the job on Thursday, hoping to shutter shops for the day in protest of the company's approach to union contract negotiations as the coffee giant launches holiday products. So this is a pretty important part of this, right? They didn't just pick any random day. This is one of the busiest days of the year for Starbucks, right? So it's basically, I guess, just like this promotional event where they go and they give people these travel mugs or cups or whatever that are supposed to be like holiday themed for Christmas that's coming up and all of that good stuff. So basically, these Starbucks workers chose this day, and again, you have hundreds of different stores, or at least 100 that are participating in this walk-off and this strike. And not only that, but they're going to show a little bit here in a second that these workers, I think, made their own cups that had their little logo of the Starbucks Workers United for the union on those cups, and decided to hand those out to people instead of the ones that Starbucks was going to be handing out. So it's absolutely amazing. You love to see it. But they continue here saying leaders of the Starbucks Workers United, which represents nearly 7,000 employees at hundreds of stores, says the company has not bargained in good faith and needlessly delayed talks on labor contracts. The company has countered that certain conditions for negotiations, namely allowing union members to silently observe proceedings on Zoom, are impermissible. Okay, so again, they're going to delay with whatever tactics they possibly can. Some of those delaying tactics are just brazenly illegal according to the National Labor Relations Act, but I mean, it's also just shit like this that's just nitpicky bullshit, and they know that it's bullshit. I mean, why would you have a problem with other union members listening in on the negotiations when it's the union that they're a part of? I mean, again, they're just coming up with whatever excuses that they can think of, but they continue saying that Thursday's one-day strike coincides with, again, Starbucks' annual Red Cup Day, when coffee shops hand out red reusable travel mugs to customers who order qualifying beverages. It is known among workers as one of the chain's busiest days, with devoted customers lined up early outside stores to collect the giveaway. They say striking workers have dubbed the walkout the Red Cup Rebellion. Love it, right? Union officials said that more than 2,000 workers will participate in 25 states, covering 112 stores in dozens of cities. I mean, this is a massive strike that is going on here. Not, necessarily in the amount of workers, but, the widespread nature of this being all across the country, and the fact that they were able to organize this in a collective fashion is, like, genuinely really impressive, especially considering that they literally don't even have their union contracts yet, and they're still managing to do, this widespread of, like, borderline not a general strike in the sense that it's across multiple different sectors of the economy, but sort of like a mini general strike within the Starbucks Corporation specifically, given the fact that they are, all stores that are all around the country and split up, and, not necessarily inherently acting as a collective right yet, at least, but they say it was 25 states covering 112 stores in dozens of cities, including Seattle, Pittsburgh, Philly, Eugene, Oregon, and Ann Arbor, Michigan. They say employees picketed outside store entrances and handed out the union's red cups to passersby. So I guess this is what the cups themselves looked like. So, I mean, I would grab one of those if I could. And, if you live in one of these states that they show down here on a map, if you live in one of these states or cities where some of these workers are going out on strike, I know it's late in the day now at this point, but, go show them some solidarity, stand with them. Don't cross the picket line. Obviously, I shouldn't need to tell you guys that, but They continue saying that in Olney, Maryland, a suburban hamlet outside Washington, employees notified supervisors of their strike at 4:30 a.m., and when they arrived at the store at 6 a.m. to picket, local management had donned aprons themselves to open the shop, said Ian Miller, a local organizer. So that'll probably be pretty hilarious for them to witness their, out-of-touch managers who don't actually really know what it's like on a day-to-day, in a day-to-day experience for a lot of these workers and the conditions that they're subjected to. Should be pretty interesting to see how much of a flop they are in taking over those slots. But they say union members then erected a tent in an empty parking space in front of the store and pleaded with customers not to cross their picket line to purchase beverages, and their requests yielded mixed results. So that absolutely sucks. If you cross a picket line, you are a piece of shit. Okay, never do that. That's a fundamental rule. Show solidarity with these workers. They're striking for a reason, and you crossing that picket line basically just undercuts some of the power that they have in engaging in collective action like this. So they say this is the first time that unionized baristas have banded together across the country to disrupt Starbucks operations. And over the past year, the company has faced more than 60 walkouts from Seattle to New York City, often forcing the company to close stores and take a hit on sales. And those strikes ranged from a few hours to more than 20 days, but they never involved more than a handful of Starbucks locations at a time. So again, genuinely impressive that they managed to pull this off. They say as organizing pushes sputtered at other companies such as Amazon, an activist dubbed the fall of 2021 Striketober, the Starbucks campaign proceeded at a plodding, determined pace and went toe-to-toe with the chain's founder and CEO Howard Schultz, and he and other executives visited stores as part of a listening tour, whatever the hell that means, and anti-union campaign. They say the company has not agreed. Okay, this is just where it gets absolutely ridiculous. To give you a perspective in terms of how bad faith Starbucks has been throughout these negotiations, right? They have not agreed to a contract with any of the 264 stores that have voted to unionize. Okay, 0 for 264, right? If you were engaging in even mildly good faith negotiations, right, during these, then you would have at least a couple, right? You would think, I mean, it's been months and months and months that this has been going on. 0 stores have they successfully gotten one of their union contracts with. And again, it's because of all of these bad faith practices that Starbucks corporate has been engaging in, the sabotaging of a lot of these different negotiation sessions. On top of that, like in some cases, just straight up firing union organizers or lessening their hours, which they're going to talk about here in a second, and shutting down entire store locations in some instances. I mean, it's just been completely ridiculous the lengths that they will go in order to prevent these unions from not only being formed, but then also from getting their initial contracts, because again, Starbucks corporate, they want to pretend that, okay, they even call their workers partners instead of actual workers. They want to pretend that they are all just part of a big happy family, and that you don't need to bring in this, as they call them, outside sources of a union, which is just complete bullshit because it is literally made up of the workers themselves. But you don't need to bring in these outside third parties, who are just going to mess up our precious relationship that we have directly with you. I mean, all of these different tactics that they use, the rhetoric that they use. And it's complete bullshit, because at the end of the day, Starbucks corporate understands that, the only way that they continue to make the absurd levels of profits that they are making off of the backs of these workers is by making sure that they are, individualized, that they are not able to engage in collective action like this or make collective demands to improve their wages, their benefits, their working conditions, etc. And they understand that the union gives them the power to actually go and take on those fights in a legitimate way, instead of having to go as an individual person to your manager who could give a shit about your working conditions and having to sort of like get on your hands and knees and beg for things that they will inevitably never give you, right? So they understand the threat that these unions pose, and clearly they are going balls to the wall to try to prevent them from actually gaining that power. But they say negotiations for the Olney shop specifically were supposed to take place on October 25th at a local hotel near Baltimore Washington International Marshall Airport, Miller said, and days before, Starbucks Workers United, this is just hilarious, okay? The union contacted the company to confirm the logistical details for the session, but didn't hear back, so the bargaining session never took place. Okay, so again, on top of like making these excuses about workers listening in on Zoom to the union negotiations that they're a part of, and all of these different other excuses, in some cases, as pointed out by Miller here, he says they just completely ghosted them. Okay, so again, going to these lengths, I mean, just completely not showing up for negotiations. I mean, what the fuck is that? They say workers say that they want a contract that provides more stable hours and provisions to force Starbucks to address understaffing and inadequate training. They say union officials have accused the company of cutting the work hours of local union leaders, so they no longer qualify for the company's health insurance plan, or working them until they burn out by purposefully understaffing the busiest hours. So again, I mean, these are just some of the tactics that we have seen, not just from Starbucks, but from all of these different corporations who have been facing some of these union battles. We saw this with Amazon. We've seen this with basically every single other store, Verizon, and a couple other ones that have been trying to get in on the game here. These are the types of tactics that they will bring out. They will always go to the fullest extent possible in order to try to prevent workers from gaining even just a modicum of power within our economy. So that was basically just the Starbucks one. Again, now we have this other one, which is an even larger strike. In fact, as they point out here, it is one of, if not the single largest academic strikes in the history of the country. So they say in the largest strike of 2022, California academic workers walk off the job. So what are they talking about here? They say in the largest work stoppage of the year, thousands of academic workers at the University of California system went on strike Monday over the university system's bargaining practices with their union. Again, similar to the stalling and bad faith tactics that we just saw from Starbucks, which is trying to secure higher wages. They say some 48,000 teaching assistants, postdocs, researchers, and graders on the front lines of teaching and research at California's prestigious public university system are seeking a minimum salary of $54,000 a year. Okay, a minimum salary of $54,000 a year. That's what they're asking for, right? That's not what they have right now. That's what they're asking for. I mean, really, seriously. I mean, this is how pathetic we want to, engage with one of the most important professions in the entire country, right? People who are teaching the next generation. Okay, this is how we want to, reward them for that, with less than $54,000 for some of the most, grueling and also vitally important to the country professions that exist. They say they also want increased childcare benefits, saying that they do not earn enough to live in the state. They also accuse the university of not bargaining in good faith with their union, the United Auto Workers. So, I mean, just a little bit on this, in terms of them not having enough to live in the state. Okay, keep in mind, California literally has the highest rents of any single state within the entire country. Okay, their average rent, I just looked this up in doing a little bit of background research for this video, average rent or median rent, actually it is median, not average, they're not the same thing, but median rent within the state of California is about $2,500 to $2,600. Okay, so if you are making roughly around $50,000 a year, you would be spending to live in the state of California, and also a lot of these universities within California are also within some of the most expensive cities. So you would end up spending like pretty much a majority of your income after taxes just on rent. Okay, when you're supposed to be spending roughly like 30% of your income on rent in a typical sense within how we have historically structured our economy and our housing system, which is already just completely fucked and ridiculous, and rents are bizarrely high. I mean, not bizarrely, but ridiculously high at this moment. Landlords are price gouging people. You have a gigantic corporate consolidation of huge swaths of the housing market. I think it was last year in 2021, you had like 25 to 30% of single family homes within the United States were bought by some of these gigantic private equity firms or investment firms. And that's how we end up with this type of a situation. I mean, housing is not something that should be decided by a market that is largely dictated by wealthy individuals or wealthy corporations, right? This is something we should socialize. This is something that we should engage with in what it should accurately be considered, which is a fundamental human right. I mean, there's only, three basic necessities beyond, the other alternatives that are beyond the other additional things that we talk about in terms of socializing or nationalizing or bringing under worker control. But those three basic necessities are just food, water, and shelter, right? So shelter is definitely something where, you could socialize this. You could have a massive public investment from the government on affordable housing and subsidize it. I mean, you look at other countries like Finland, and I've covered this on some of my videos before on this channel, where they've essentially eradicated homelessness, and then you find out at the end of the day that it's actually cheaper in the long run to invest in public housing, to invest in mental health care, to invest in addiction services, and eradicate homelessness as well. It saves money in the long run. And in the same sense, obviously these teachers specifically, they're facing a completely unaffordable housing crisis right now, and they're basically just asking for slight pay increases to have the ability to even just live where they work, right? I mean, just one of the most basic things you could possibly be asking for. But they got a quote here saying, "At every turn, the university has sought to act unlawfully at the bargaining table, which is preventing us from reaching an agreement," said Neil Sweeney, the president of UAW Local 5810, which represents more than 11,000 UC postdocs and academic researchers. They say the University of California's strike is the largest academic strike in higher education in U.S. history, according to the UAW. They say the bargaining units that represent UC academic workers said university leadership has illegally made changes to pay and transit benefits without consulting the union. They also alleged that the university has refused to provide necessary information about who is in the bargaining unit and has otherwise obstructed the bargaining process, and negotiations have been underway for more than a fucking year. I mean, how ridiculous is that? That, this applies to Starbucks as well. It applies all across the board whenever you actually form a union, or even some of these ones that are more long-standing unions, right? I mean, they are always going to stall as much as physically possible. This also applies to the rail strike that we've been talking about as well. These people, these rail workers who are potentially about to go on strike, and we'll see whether or not the Joe Biden administration wants to do, an aggressively anti-union move and pressure Congress to try to stop them from actually going out on strike. But those rail workers have been trying to get a contract since 2020. I mean, we're years into this process now, almost hitting 2023, and all of these rail corporations, which are backed by guys like Warren Buffett and other Wall Street millionaire and billionaire ghouls, I mean, they don't get a contract for years. I mean, it's just completely ridiculous the extent to which not just these corporations are willing to go to prevent these unions from forming, because in some sense I understand where they're coming from the perspective of a corporation, from the perspective of a capitalist, right? They don't want these unions because those unions will secure better pay, better benefits, better working conditions, etc. for these workers. And of course, with having to expend more on all of those different fronts, that's less surplus value that you are able to extract off of the backs of these workers, right? So it makes sense under a capitalist structure of the economy why they are doing all of this. But at the same time, what's even more pathetic than them doing that is them getting away with that, right? I mean, I brought up that article earlier with Starbucks and the NLRB, filing hundreds of complaints against them. But what are the actual consequences here, right? We saw the same thing with Amazon. The NLRB concluded that they were engaging in widespread illegal union busting tactics. But what is the consequence? We're talking about billion-dollar companies here, okay? So if the punishment is like a slap on the wrist in terms of a fine, or if the punishment is just basically like scolding them, then that's not a real consequence, right? They're just going to do the calculations in their head. And I mean, again, if them forming a union successfully, these workers ends up getting them those better pay, the better benefits, the better working conditions, etc. That's going to cost these companies a lot of money. So it just becomes like a basic financial calculus in terms of like, the cost of allowing these unions to form from the perspective of the company is way larger than the consequences of engaging in illegal and widespread union busting tactics and bad faith negotiations. So, I mean, this is just one reason why we need to significantly bolster, number one, labor rights, passing something like the PRO Act, and, expand the ability for people to engage in collective bargaining and organizing on that front. But then number two, I mean, we got to beef up the National Labor Relations Board, right? The NLRB, beef that up, hire more people, give them more resources, give them more funding, and give them the tools, give them the weapons in their arsenal to be able to actually hold these corporations accountable, whether it's like, gigantic fines, and it would have to be millions and millions of dollars for some of these companies that are worth billions and billions of dollars, right? You'd have to significantly ramp up the fines, or, side with these unions in ways where, if a company is engaging in illegal union busting practices, then just make it so that those unions are able to form by default. And then if they're, stalling in the negotiations process, then maybe you have the NLRB step in or have some default process through legislation where, whatever the unions want, that's what just default gets accepted at the end of the day. I mean, we have a completely decimated union movement in this country. We have basically since the undoing of the FDR's New Deal era, and for decades now we just had a completely decimated labor movement, basically no organizational capacity, definitely not at like the general strike or the federal level, the national level, in terms of having a cohesive labor movement. And we have one of the lowest union participation rates in the modern developed world right now. We don't really have that massive sectoral bargaining that a lot of other countries have, and we're left left with a situation where we have skyrocketing inequality. We have worse wealth inequality. I talk about this all the time. A statistic that blew my mind: worse wealth inequality than pre-revolution France when they rolled out the fucking guillotines for the elites within their society. That's the type of situation we have right now. I mean, a vast majority of workers working paycheck to paycheck. You have 5 or so Americans that have more wealth than the bottom half of the country, and you basically just have this completely corrupted and spiraled shareholder capitalism that is purely in service of returning as much value, as much surplus value extracted off of these workers to Wall Street executives, to the CEOs, the board members of these companies, and the shareholders. And that comes at the expense not just of a lot of these workers, but also at the expense of the broader implications of the American economy, and also the broader implications of the potential for us to maintain some sort of a stable so-called democracy, right? I mean, you cannot have this type of an economic reality for the vast majority of a country and expect that this is something that is going to be sustainable in the long run. It's just historic. I mean, from a historical perspective, it is not going to be sustainable. So, I mean, again, that just puts the emphasis on standing in solidarity with these workers, whether it's in, covering it, whether it's in, spreading the message, or whether it's in even unionizing your own workplace or refusing to cross picket lines when you may have the opportunity to do so. All of us need to, in one way or another, participate in this ongoing resurgence of the American labor movement if it's actually going to be successful in the long run.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying